Hello, Gold Coasters. My name is Nathan Makaryk. I'm the author of Nottingham and Lionhearts, which is my newest book. I'd like to thank Gold Coast Libraries for having me as part of this virtual author encounter. Thanks for inviting me into your living room or bedroom or toilet. I see you. I see you on the toilet. I'm going to talk about my latest book, Lionhearts, and I'll be talking a little bit about my life and how these books came to be. And at the end, I'll also be answering some questions that Gold Coast Libraries has gotten from some of you out there as well. So let's dive into it. So Nottingham and Lionhearts are a retelling of the Robin Hood legend. I know there's been 8,000 versions that have been retold, and I'm just another guy to have my hand at those characters. But I want to talk to you a little bit about why I wrote the books and what I was trying to do that previous books hadn't done. So this all started. I am a theater owner here in Southern California, and I produce plays. I'm a playwright. I'm also an actor. I'm a stage combat choreographer. I kind of get my hands in all elements of the plays. And I was talking with my theatrical partner back in 2011, and we were talking about what shows to produce the following year. And normally, the shows that I produce tend to have lots of sword fights in them because I like fighting with swords and combat choreography, like I mentioned. So we were just kind of brainstorming on what shows we could do next year, and he mentioned Robin Hood, and my reaction was, I hate Robin Hood. Oh no! That's not necessarily true. I don't hate Robin Hood at all, but everything about Robin Hood I love. I love swords. I love archery. I love the medieval setting. I love castles. I love the fights. I love everything about the mythology of Robin Hood. But what I don't like specifically about the majority of the incarnations I've seen of Robin Hood is that it's one of the worst offenders of the black and white line between good guys and bad guys, where good guys are unbelievably good and they only do the right thing, and they never kill unless they have to, while bad guys are, mustache twirling villains who will do anything to get what they want. Think about the Sheriff of Nottingham. The Sheriff of Nottingham, he is one of the most quintessential evil antagonists out there, right? But does he even have a name? Can you think of what the sheriff's name is from any incarnation of Robin Hood, aside from Mervyn from Men in Tights? Probably not. You probably can't think of the name of who the Sheriff of Nottingham is. But historically, we know that information. We know who held the office of the High Sheriff of Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, and the Royal Forests in that period. So why don't we know that in any of the Robin Hood tellings? And that's kind of where my research began, was I wanted to figure out who was the sheriff, and was he really as evil as we say he was? Now, realistically, yeah, he probably was. Yes, in medieval times, I'm sure that anyone holding a title of that importance was probably corrupt as get out, right? But I am more interested in telling a story that blends the idea of good guys and bad guys into something that's gray in between. I wanted a Robin who really, maybe didn't want to get into the rebel business, who doesn't give away all of his coin out of the generosity of his heart. But what were some other possible justifications for that? Perhaps him giving out all that coin in the forest is actually a method of bribery. He's bribing the forests to keep his secrets so that he can continue to operate without them selling him out to the guardsmen. And for the sheriff, was taxing everyone really the worst thing in the world? Was this really an act of cruelty? Or was it something that he had to do because of the crusade that was going on, collection of the war tithes, later on the collection of King Richard's ransom? This is all stuff that he has to do as a politician, and perhaps he was trying very desperately to balance the responsibilities he had as a politician with the attempts to keep the peace, and these thieves in the forests were actually making life much harder for him to keep his county running. So, I wanted to see this world where there was a middle ground, where good guys are gray and bad guys are gray, and out of that, we can discover where the legend of Robin Hood may have grown. So that's kind of the the basis of Nottingham, the book. At the time, again, we're talking about when I was starting to write the play, which is the first version of the book, back in 2011. That was what the play was based around, was the relationship between Robin and the sheriff, as they both kind of started off in the same place, and then their politics forced them into different directions. And that eventually, the play went very well. And people asked me, hey, what are you going to do with the play once it's done? And I didn't really have a good answer, except for the idea that maybe I could turn this into a novel. And novelizing it allowed me to explore even more of the things about Robin Hood that I kind of wanted to deconstruct. There's a lot of Robin Hood tropes out there that, if you think about them, are just kind of silly. They don't really make a lot of sense. And I wanted to disassemble them and show them to you and say, hey, is this really as good as you think it is? No? Well, let's break it open and take out the pieces that work and rebuild something that makes more sense. So the first book, Nottingham, is very much that. I tried very hard to keep as many sort of canon elements of a Robin Hood story as you need to recognize it as the story that you want. For instance, you still get Robin Hood and Little John fighting with staves over the river. You still get a Robin Hood stealing from nobles traveling through the Sherwood Forest. You get the sheriff kidnapping Marion to force a marriage upon her. Right? You have sort of these tentpole events that we recognize as Robin Hood. But in my version, they all kind of have alternative explanations. And my hope is that as you read through it, you start to realize, wait, yeah, that never made as much sense as I thought it did. And so moving on to the sequel, Lionhearts, which is the one that's coming out this year, Lionhearts takes that, a whole step further. So where Nottingham really does tell the story of the creation of Robin Hood, Lionhearts allows me to take all the characters that I've created and walk them the next step into the more historical world that happens. So the big trope that I tackle in Lionhearts, if you can guess by the title itself, has to do with King Richard the Lionheart, King Richard the Lionheart as he's known, or as he's known in the film industry, Richard of the Last Reel. Richard of the Last Reel is known for coming in the last reel of the movie and waving his hand, and everyone, everything gets better, and he fixes the problems, and he slaps Prince John for being such a naughty prince, and he kind of saves the day. It's a very, savior moment for King Richard to come in and stop the woes of what's happening with Robin Hood. That's not what happened historically. So, historically, when King Richard finally came home, after being imprisoned in Austria for a good length of time after leaving the Holy Wars, when he got back, the first thing he did was he brought his army to Nottingham and he laid siege to the castle because Prince John was there kind of holding himself up. And that is the story that I wanted to tell through the eye of the same mentality I had done in the first book of, are the good guys as good as you think? Are the bad guys as bad as you think? The people who are defending the castle are not necessarily, rebelling against King Richard at all. Prince John is not necessarily trying to seize power for himself. King Richard is not here to wave his hand and make the day better. He's got his own problems from being imprisoned for a year and a half or two. In any event, that's the world that we're seeing in Lionhearts. And while it has fewer of the canon Robin Hood moments that Nottingham has, I really enjoyed it because I get to do things with my characters that I wasn't able to do in book one because I did have to be so faithful to the Robin Hood story. And one of the things that I get to do, which I'm very excited about, is I definitely get to expand on the women roles significantly. Robin Hood, let's face it, is a sausage fest. There are a lot of guys in that story. All of the merry men are all dudes, right? And you've got Maid Marian, usually as the only female. And I did my best in Nottingham to bump up more female roles, as much as I could realistically, without just kind of gender swapping some of the roles that do exist. But in Lionhearts, I'm able to go a little bit further with that and give them even more agency and give them more power over what's happening, not only in the plot, but in their lives. And I'm happy about that because I think we're probably all sick of totally dude-centric stories. Let me, what other questions? I have my questions right here. So that's kind of what you can expect going into Lionhearts. I don't want to say too much. There is one thing that very much excites me about Lionhearts, which I have to be careful about because I don't want to give too many spoilers about what happens in Nottingham. But Lionhearts also allowed me to explore what I'm going to call the Robinverse. All of the possible different types of Robin Hoods there are. So in the first book, Robin of Locksley was one of my main characters, and obviously he is Robin Hood. As this second book comes out, we get more Robin Hoods. So if we think about all the different Robin Hoods that we've had, in media, in film, and TV, they kind of come from different places. Some of them are very much the swashbuckling nobleman. The Earl of Huntingdon is one of the historical possible, originators of the Robin Hood myth. Some of them, are soldiers coming back from the war. Some of them are just a kind of like an anarchist who's living in the forest, who's just trying to get what's his back. Some of them are gritty. Some of them have finesse. And I wanted to be able to do a lot of that in Lionhearts as well. So that is a big thing about what happens in Lionhearts. We get more people who are donning the hood, shall we say, and it's kind of fun because you never necessarily know who it is that you're seeing when there is a Robin Hood on screen or on the page, right? You're watching a Robin Hood show up from someone else's eyes, and you don't know who it is. And there's many different kind of possibilities of who is being Robin Hood at any given time. So in some ways, it kind of has a little bit of a murder mystery elements to it, in which you're trying to figure out who was the Robin every time that you saw him. But that's just kind of one of the extra bonus things that I got to do with this particular book. Let me look at some of the questions that came in. That's enough about just the book itself. Let's see. How long did it take to write it? So my first book, Nottingham, I wrote the play version actually pretty quickly, just in the span of a summer. And then we produced the play the next year in, I want to say, March and April. And then when I decided to novelize it, I just kind of sat down and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, all right, I'm going to write a book. I've never written a book before outside of junior high. Man, that doesn't count. And I made a kind of a big mistake as a debut author in that I wrote a big beefcake book. It's huge. It's long because that's the kind of book that I like to read. I like to read big epics like Game of Thrones. And so I figured, well, that's the kind of book that I should write. And so it is a very sizable book, much larger than a debut author, if you're thinking about writing, should attempt to write, because there's just so many more hurdles that come along with a publisher and an editor and an agent saying yes to a book of that size for an author who's not known. So that made my journey, it put a lot of obstacles in front of me as far as getting the book onto a shelf. But it took me about a year to write the first draft of that book, which seems quite fast in retrospect. But again, I had the play and the success of the play to fall back on. So in many ways, I just felt like I was writing the events of the play that I had already been working on for a year. Obviously, I expanded the world that happens significantly in that novel. You couldn't fit everything that happened in the novel into a 2.5-hour play. But it's about a year's worth of writing the book and then about a year's worth of editing it. So I guess 2 years to write it. And then it took me a couple of years to get an agent and a couple of years to get a publisher and a couple of years for it to get on the shelf. The publishing world goes very slowly. As far as the sequel, Lionhearts, I started writing Lionhearts before I even had a deal for the first book, for Nottingham, which in some ways was dumb because when we ended up going back and editing Nottingham, there were some important changes that had massive effects forward into Lionhearts. So editing one book was actually editing 2 books simultaneously in order to make sure all the things connected. But it was helpful because there are so many things that happen in Lionhearts that I was able to seed into Nottingham knowing that they were coming into the next book. And whether they were obvious or whether they were just little things here and there to make sure that the two tied together nicely, that was beneficial. But from start to finish, it took me about 4 years to write Lionhearts. Question, what did you most enjoy about writing this particular book? I think I've already touched on that a little bit. The idea of expanding it beyond the typical Robin Hood story. There are still some typical Robin Hood things in this story. Like I said, the King Richard thing comes back. The archery contest is a big Robin Hood trope where, the sheriff opens up the archery contest to let in Robin Hood, and that's how they're going to capture him. That is an event that happens in this book, and I can't reveal anything, but it does not go as one would typically expect that event to go. But in general, yes, what I enjoyed most about this book was just being able to get a wider world, because the first book, again, took place also on stage. And on stage, I have limitations scenically, right? Most of the play jumped back and forth between a setting in the castle and a setting in the forest, and with minor variations in between, because that was how it had to logistically happen for the scenery to take place. So the book was still kind of structured that way, going back and forth between two settings. I did a lot of expanding to make sure that there were more areas and wider, bigger scenes. But for the most part, the main plot still kind of goes back and forth like that. Whereas in Lionhearts, I did not have that restriction. I did not have to put it on stage. And it could not take place on stage. If I had to reverse engineer Lionhearts and make a play out of it, there's no way. It's not going to happen because it is too big. There are too many areas. There are too many places that the plot goes. There are big events to take place. I mentioned King Richard sieging the castle. That's a hard thing to do on stage unless it all conveniently takes place just off stage like it does in all of Shakespeare's plays. So it was very freeing to be able to have a wider scenery, I guess is the question. Here's a question. How was your work in improv and theater influenced your writing? How has your work in improv and theater influenced your writing? So I mentioned that obviously I do a lot of theater. I also I'm an improv comedian. I've run an improv group for about 20 years, and we literally perform every single week unless there's a quarantine. So I have not performed in 6 months. But how improv and theater works in my writing is actually that I tend to get drawn more towards dialogue quite often. I love dialogue scenes. I love interactions between two characters that last a long time. And usually I will write those as a play first. So rather than deal with all of the dialogue tags and the narrative in between, I'll just write the dialogue. Character X says this, character B says that, back and forth, because that lets me just hone in on the interactions of those characters and them reacting to each other. And usually when I write that, I am sort of using my improv background in that I'm letting each character react instinctively, and sometimes that means that they're reacting in kind of comedic ways. They're just commenting on something that the previous person said that wasn't phrased well, or just making little jokes at each other the way that we do in real life. So that was kind of fun in that I was able to play both characters and react in real time and kind of record what my reactions are, and then edit that into an actual scene with banter back and forth. And sometimes that banter gets cut. Sometimes I elaborate on it. There are a couple scenes in Lionhearts that specifically are intended to be comedic. There's one that's almost written like a sketch that you could encapsulate it and do it on stage, where there's just kind of three people who are misunderstanding each other and playing with each other's words. So that's kind of fun stuff. I also really like monologues. Look at my half-hour monologue right here. I love monologues on stage. I love directing monologues. I love performing monologues. And so I do tend to end up with some beefy monologues for my characters quite often, because I'm very comfortable with the arc of a monologue and how that shifts and changes. And so usually like my conflicts, my big climaxes in the books are often dialogue related rather than action related. Again, not to spoil anything, but when the sheriff and Robin face off in the first book, Nottingham, it is a debate. It's a meeting of the minds where they're both arguing their own point and trying to get the other person to understand why, no, you're wrong, no, and I'm right. And in fact, Robin comes in with a sword brandished, and the sheriff says, "What are you doing? Why do you have a sword out? Let's talk about this, you crazy person." So I think that's part of where my improv and my theatrical background come into play in my writing, is that I'm just drawn to those kinds of interactions between characters that don't involve punching, I guess. All right, so what else? What is your research process for writing historical fiction? It's a good question. My biggest recommendation for writing historical fiction, if it's possible, go there. Go there. I've had I've been able to visit Nottingham a couple of times since starting to write this. I had never been there, before I wrote the play or anything like that. But then after I was writing the book, I was able to visit a couple times and spend, a good week there, like, learning the city, exploring the castle. That kind of stuff is just invaluable. There's only so much you can do. You can research online, but in the city, I could feel it. I could get a sense of what it would be like for those characters to be able to see the castle from this street, to know the relationship of the marketplace to the St. Mary's, things like that. Learn the streets. The second book, Lionhearts, very much takes place in the city of Nottingham, quite a lot. And a lot of that is drawn from my experience in that city and walking that city and learning, spending time in the tunnels underneath the city, doing tours of the castle. There's models inside the castle that I could not find anywhere else online that show me, realistically what it was structured like in that era. Everything else, though, do what you can online. It'll get you most of the way there. The rule of historical fiction is that 95% of your research should not show up on the page. Your readers don't want to read your research. It should just sort of be intimated. You should feel that research is there without actually shoving it down the reader's face. So hopefully that came across. Again, it is historical and it's fiction. The fiction is where you're going to flourish. The fiction is where you get to tell your story in your own way. And there are times when it's okay to just kind of say, "All right, history, I'm going to put you on pause because I want to tell it like this," which I think ties a little bit into this next question, which is, what are the challenges when writing characters and places that appear in both myth and history? And that's very much true for Robin Hood. It's funny, after I wrote the book and I got the book deal, I was actually a little surprised that it was classified as historical fiction, because I had never really thought of it as historical fiction, because Robin Hood to me feels very fantasy. Knowing that, we don't know if Robin Hood really exists. He's not necessarily a historical character. We know so many things about it are definitely anachronistic. We know that it wouldn't have made sense for these certain characters to exist. And so the very fact that you're talking about Robin Hood and using sort of the quintessential elements of Robin Hood, say that you're already cheating. You're already cheating. You're already saying, I acknowledge that this isn't accurate and I'm going to do it anyways. So for me, I just embraced it. I said, listen, I think in the intro, I say this is a mix of history and legend, and it is faithful to neither. The first book, it covers events that in real life covered about 6 months, and I crush it down into about 2 months. Because it tells a better story. The fiction was better when I was able to compress the events closer to each other. You ever seen a biopic movie where, years span between scenes and you just feel that disconnect where you're like, okay, well, the story I was watching ended years ago and now I'm in this new scene. I'd rather be able to tell a story in that compact place, even if the accuracy of those historical events is being a little bended. So that's how I treat it, is bend and do your best to be respectful of both. All right, so how did you spend lockdown, And what are you most looking forward to for the rest of the year? Well, that's a very kind question. The assumption being that I have anything besides more lockdown to look forward to for the rest of the year, because I'm in the United States where we are full of dumb people and we're going to be in lockdown for a while. So you can fully enjoy the rest of your year while I will continue to be in my office forever. Lockdown has been hard because I also have a full-time day job. I'm not so successful an author that I get to live off of writing yet. So I have a full day job, which means that I'm now working from home all day long, as is my wife. She's also working from home, as is our child. We've got a 4-year-old who no longer goes to daycare because daycares are closed. So me and my wife, literally, we toggle who is working and who is watching the kid every 90 minutes from 7 in the morning till 10 at night every single day. And it's terrible. It does not leave any room for anything else. So I haven't gotten a lot of writing done since quarantine began. Not a lot of reading either. And I think that that's going to continue for a while. So when that does end, the things that I will be looking forward to is not that. I'll be looking forward to sending my kid away into daycare so that I can breathe. And he doesn't even go to sleep. He goes to sleep like at midnight. This kid, he doesn't sleep ever. We've tried. It's madness. All right, I'm almost out of time. Let me get to a couple other questions. What is the next big project for Nathan Makaryk? Thank you for asking. I can't answer that yet. I'm recording this in early August. You're probably watching it mid-September or later, presumably. By now, by the time we're watching it, I may have some big news that I can share. As of this moment, I don't have any news I can share. I do have another book that I've written that I'm currently trying to get my publisher to produce, and we may know that in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully there's also a third in this series coming, but again, that's dependent on the publisher. So my first contract was for 2 books, for Nottingham and Lionhearts. And so my instinct is that we'll see how these books are doing before they choose to elect to get a third in the series. I'm hopeful that it will go there. The book seems to be doing fairly well. But since I haven't known for sure, since they haven't contracted that next book, I wrote another book that's kind of in a different genre, and hopefully that gets made too, because I really like it. And hopefully you could check me out. Go to my website now. I may be able to announce it already, but I can't say anything as of this second. And what am I reading at the moment? I've got a couple on my bookshelf behind me. I'm currently reading The Unconquered City by K.A. Dorr. This is the third in her Chronicles of Gadid trilogy. This is assassins against the undead. You can't argue with assassins fighting the undead. Fantastic. I'm also reading The Worst of All Possible Worlds. This is the third in Alex White's The Salvagers series. Their books are incredible. They're funny. And then if I can recommend one, Shrouded Loyalties by Reese Hogan. This was my favorite book of 2019. If you like, this is kind of war sci-fi, but if you like my books as far as treating both sides as sympathetic and being able to see the other opponent as the bad guy or the good guy, depending on whose side you're on, this is amazing. Love this book. And I'm also reading. I know you shouldn't be reading 4 books at once, but that's what happens when you only get to read in spurts. Also, By Force Alone. This is a retelling of the Arthur legend, kind of in a similar vein of what I'm writing as far as a gritty kind of reboot. So that's what's on my shelf and what I'm reading right now. Okay, I think I'm out of time. So thank you. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy Robin Hood, or else why are you watching this for the last half hour? That was a poor choice in your own personal life. I hope you enjoy Nottingham and Lionhearts. You can follow me on Twitter at Nathan Makaryk. Also, check out my website, nathanmakaryk.com, for more updates on future books. So thanks again, Gold Coast. It was wonderful talking with you and answering your questions. Thanks for having me.